speaker today is Anandi, Amanda Geroy, who will speak on Lord Shiva and the celebration of Maha Shivratri in India, which is on Saturday this year. Changes everything. Nandi is familiar to you by now. She's been doing the series on Hindu deities. She lived in India for 7 years. Knows a lot about the deities. She studied dance, percussion, language, culture, and religion. She's taught theater and dance in India, San Francisco, Bay Area, and Taos. Has adapted a number of folk tales from across the world on the stage. She enjoys working with children, teaching dance, theater, and folk arts. And she also loves cows. She milks them.
Yay, cows.
And she's an amazing singer as well, and an amazing human being as well. So please welcome Anandi.
Thank you.
It's that bottom one. Oh, there. Nope. That one. There you go.
Thanks. Okay, can you guys all hear me? Awesome. It's so nice to be here always, and such a pleasure to see the beautiful friendly faces and support, and to just have the opportunity to dive deeper into some of these topics that I really love. So it's a great opportunity for me every time I come to Unity. So thank you guys for having me and for giving me that chance to talk about the things that are close to my heart. So we've been doing a series on various Hindu gods and Hindu mythology. So today we're going to talk about Shiva, because this Saturday is Maha Shivratri. And Maha Shivratri is celebrated on the new moon, the crescent moon, the dark time. And it's actually Shivratri every month. So you have an opportunity to worship and remember and welcome Shiva into your heart and being every month when the moon goes dark. But especially this moon of the year, in this darkest time and darkest moon, we welcome Shiva as we regenerate into the spring. And we talked last week about Brahma, who's the creator god in the Hindu Trinity. Vishnu's the preserver, Shiva's the destroyer, but he's also a god of opposites. And so not only is he that which brings about the cyclical dissolution of form in the universe, but he's also that which brings it back into being. And he is that which is the substratum of all. So he holds in his hand, especially in his form as Nataraj, which is the Lord of Dance, which is very special to my heart. As some of you guys know, I studied dance in India for a long time. And so Nataraj, the Lord of Dance, is very venerated and revered in the Indian classical dance traditions. He's shown in a pose where one hand is up like this, which Ayana knows, who's in the back there. She studied dance with me. This is Pataka Hasta. This is the name of this mudra. And in a deity, a lot of deities you'll see are shown with this mudra in their hand, and it means it's called Abhaya when you talk about it as a deity, which means no fear. So if you see a deity doing this, then it's saying, don't have fear. I've got your back. You know, don't be afraid. I'm taking care of you, sending blessings. So this means Abhaya. And then he's
doing that in this.
Okay, great. Yeah, so he's giving his blessing.
He's blessing
Parvati, his wife.
Parvati.
So also in the Nataraj image, his other hand is in what's called Dola Hasta, which is the relaxed pose, and he's pointing at his foot. The left foot would be up above the ground like this, and that symbolizes liberation. So his right hand is saying, don't fear. His left hand is pointing at the foot, which is raised, which is symbolizing liberation from the cycle of rebirth. So he's basically saying, though you may be caught up in this cycle, as we all are, don't fear, I'm always there. And I am also the guide, the pathway to liberation, to that which takes us out of that. Even within this lifetime and in this samsara, this cycle of birth and death, remembrance of the divine substratum is a way for us to gain a sense of perspective on it all, on the ebb and flow of this universe, the constant really pulse of the universe, which is that creation and destruction is happening with every in-breath, with every out-breath. Every in-breath is Brahma, the creator. Every out-breath is Shiva, the destroyer. So that sense of the pulsing cycles of the seasons, of the breath, of the beating heart, that all is the cycle of the universe in creation and destruction, and Shiva symbolizes that. He also holds in two of the other hands a fire, which symbolizes the fire of creation, and a damaru drum, which is a two-headed drum. You shake it like this and it goes drrrr, and that symbolizes Shabda, which is the universal sound, the first sound of creation. So we talked, Jenny was asking last week about the sound Om, which created the universe. So that Damaru also represents that initial creation sound. And so sound is associated with the element of ether. If you, in the Hindu system, there are 5 elements. The ether element, which is the most subtle. So the first element that's created out of the void of nothingness, of non-creation, is ether. And that's created through that sound. The sound permeates the ether, and then slowly and slowly the subtle becomes more gross as the elements are created and this world manifests. And so in the Hindu cosmic cycle, this universe, which is seemingly infinite, right? The universe itself is seemingly infinite space within which all the planets, all the solar systems and universes are housed. That itself is housed within a greater infinite void, and that itself is Shiva. So in the cosmic cycle, you have to have, as in every cycle of time, of the seasons, you have to have the death part of the cycle in order to have the rebirth part of the cycle. Even as humans, parents, we literally give of our flesh, we give of our body, we give of our life force and essence to create more beings that will continue creation. A tree gives its seed, and that contains so much of its ojas, which they say in Hindu philosophy, ojas is that which is the deepest life energy that we have. That is, every time a woman ovulates, that deepest life energy is held in the egg. Every time a man releases semen, that deepest life energy is there. So when we actually literally create in our human way of creation, or in any of the plants and animals, the way that all living things are created, we're literally dying in a certain sense, giving of our life energy as a sacrifice to create. And so Shiva represents that. So in that sense, he's a god of dualities. He's creation and destruction in one, and really shows how those two aren't separate from one another. He's often depicted. So one of the depictions I just mentioned was Nataraj. Actually, in that depiction too, there's one other aspect. He's actually trampling on a small dwarf and dancing on a dwarf. And that dwarf represents ignorance. So his name actually means epilepsy. And so with that idea of epilepsy is that which kind of imbalances us and causes us to lose consciousness. So it's the delusion and ignorance, ignorance in the sense of not always using our best discretion or discernment, or following our deepest knowing in terms of how to proceed in life. Always, not always making the right choices. Sometimes following our baser instincts, or acting out of an unhealed place, or whatever that, not that that's bad, but that is the sense of ignorance that we can overcome through what he points to with his hand pointing at the foot, and liberation from that ultimate ignorance, which says we are separate from all other beings. I mean, that's the ultimate ignorance that he liberates us from. Because when we think as human beings, we obviously have this very strong desire to live. And it's wired into us, this desire to stay alive, to protect ourselves, to protect our young, to protect creation, to live and not die. And yet this acceptance that what we're trying to preserve is just one small piece of the whole. And we aren't limited to that. We aren't limited to these selves. This is not the ultimate reality of who we are. Is this identity with a name and a form, and that only occupies however much space this body occupies. Our consciousness is the supreme consciousness. We aren't separate from that. And so that's what Shiva's pointing to. That is the liberation. And so, in our small minds, or that which is our normal kind of everyday consciousness, we can think, well, I don't want to die. right? Obviously, nobody wants to die. No one wants to be taken out of this cycle of death and rebirth necessarily. When we're attached, we love those who we love. We love the creation. We love the sunrise and the beauty and all the things that we do love and are attached to, that which we've made, our homes. And yet he's pointing to a deeper knowing, a deeper reality in which they're not separate. All those things and more is who we are. It's us plus. So that is Shiva. That's what he's trying to point us to. So I have a story for you guys. And then I'll get more into the iconography too. So this is a story about another form of Shiva. The form of Shiva that's most often venerated in his temples is the linga. And so the linga is a phallic symbol. And it's also, at the same time, linga literally means mark or significator. So it's sort of a cylindrical shape, which is, I guess, sort of like our closest approximation to something that has a form to signify the formless. So because Shiva is such a deity about going beyond form and into the void, into the vastness, and kind of exploring that dimension of consciousness, to give him a personification, even though he does have that. So again, a deity of opposites. He's got a personification as a great yogi, as a husband, which is another duality that he embodies. At the same time, he's also seen as something that's just literally like a marker, like a pointer, pointing to something beyond. So one of the stories of the Shiva Lingam, we actually talked about one last week when we talked about Brahma being, Shiva came in the form of a lingam of fire, and Brahma and Vishnu were searching for the ends of it, and Brahma ended up telling a little fib, getting cursed to not having any temples. But here's another story about the lingam and its fiery nature. So Shiva is always associated with fire as well in terms of the elements and what he represents. Personality-wise, he's where Vishnu is very like a nurturing force, a caregiver who wants to keep creation alive, and so very benevolent, beneficent, coming down in his avatars out of compassion. Vishnu's avatars are very associated with the energy of compassion. Shiva is quick to anger. He's very fiery, sometimes makes decisions that aren't necessarily well thought out. Like when we told the story of Ganesh, when we were talking about Ganesh, he cut off his own son's head before even bothering to find out who he was, that he was his son. He just cut off his head in anger. And so a lot of the time, his fire is also his weapon. He uses fire as a weapon he burned the city of Tripura, who was this triple demon. So he's often called Tripurari, the slayer of the demon Tripura, the 3 cities of Tripura. So he's very fiery. On Mahashivratri, one of the main practice, the worship of Lord Shiva, not just on that night, but whenever you go to a Shiva temple or engaged in worshiping a Shiva linga, is to pour milk or other cooling things like cool water, milk, coconuts, which is cooling, coconut water. You pour that on the lingam to kind of cool that fiery energy. Because as a great yogi, when the great yogis, those who practice severe austerities, they become very hot. And so that they talk a lot about in Hindu mythology and philosophy about the heat of tapas or austerity. So as you do more and more, you restrain your senses. You don't let your energy go out here and there, either sexually or through whatever, following your desire body, or even through a lot of action, because a lot of the ascetic practice is sitting in one place. And so you're basically collecting your energy, you're conserving your energy, you're keeping your energy inside. And that generates a lot of heat, because heat is energy. Energy is heat. And so those who have gained a lot of spiritual energy and mastery are hot. So Shiva has a lot of like heat and fire within him. His 3 eyes represents 3 types of fire: the sun, the moon, and fire. So they represent a heat and energy. And also the 3rd eye is the eye of wisdom, or the inner eye, the eye which sees beyond a form. So in this story, there were some rishis, or holy sages, 7 of them, who lived in this pine forest with their wives, and they were all great devotees of Lord Shiva. And so they worshipped him morning, noon, and night. They were constantly singing him hymns, and everybody was happy. And the wives, did their wifely duties, and everybody was just in this kind of bliss in this pine forest. Well, Shiva saw this, and he was very happy with it. And so he decided, I'm going to go and do something nice for my devotees. Well, something to know about Shiva is he's always an outsider. He's never, and we talked about this when we talked about Parvati, his consort, but he is associated with the cremation grounds. He's associated with death. He's also called Mrityunjaya, which means the one who's beyond, the conqueror of death. And so again, we worship Shiva to go beyond the cycle of birth and death, because death is built into everything born. As we're born, our death is, it's marked, as they say. They go like this in India to say that your fate is marked on your forehead, sort of like we are, as Ajahn Chah, the Buddhist teacher said, I see this cup here, and I know that this cup is already broken. And so I can enjoy drinking out of this cup because this cup is already broken. If I attach to this cup, if I don't think it's going to break, I'm always going to be holding on and scared of losing this moment. But when I see that death is inherent in life, then I can actually be present. I can actually be in this moment. So Shiva holds the attributes of death. He's smeared with ashes from the cremation ground. He has all these ganas who are ghouls and ghosts all hanging around with him, and they all party and have fun time together. We talked about the wedding of Shiva and Parvati when we talked about Parvati, and how the ganas all came and sort of scandalized her family. And so he's always an outsider, sort of on the fringes of society, doesn't follow the rules, has long dreadlocks, and doesn't necessarily bathe, and he wears rags. He really doesn't care what he looks like. He's not all about like fashion at all. But that can be fashionable too. So but he's naked sometimes, which is like the ultimate, like, go somewhere naked, you're going to jail. The law is going to be after you. So, he's the one who just flaunts himself in the face of the law. Okay, so knowing this about Shiva, his boon for his 7 rishi devotees was to disguise himself. Of course, he always wants to test his devotees too, right? The more close you are to him, know that the more he'll test you. So just, that's not because he doesn't like you. It's because he likes you. So he wanted to test them and also do something nice for them. So he dresses himself up like a beggar in rags, and he makes himself red and blue and very ugly. And he's also naked, but I guess maybe he's just sort of got dangling bits of clothing on him, but you can imagine him almost naked, okay? Little dangling bits of clothing, jetta flying, very disfigured, red and blue, and very funny looking. And he shows up in the forest at a time when the 7 rishis were off collecting firewood. So their wives are all there. And he goes to the wives and he starts doing this dance, which is very lewd. And we have children in the audience, so I won't get into details of the dance, but you can imagine what he was doing, okay? He's there holding his lingam in his hand and making all sorts of gestures and, shaking around, all everywhere. And some of the wives were very frightened and they ran for the woods, but some of the wives were very interested. And they got closer and more curious to see what he was up to. And some of them began to embrace him, and some of them held his hand, and some of them started fighting with each other over him. And into this scene, but they're all mesmerized because it's Shiva. So he has, this intense luster, right? He is a divine being. So he is lustrous and incredibly, again, this opposite's like ugly, attractive. He's both. He is finding the beauty in that which is not necessarily physically beautiful. So they are just enraptured by him and just loving this dance. And of course, he's the master of dance, so he must be incredibly graceful with his awkward body and playing this amazing, blowing this horn and doing his drum and singing a song. So the rishis come home, right? And they see this sight, and, all of their wisdom, all their discernment, everything just goes out the window because of course, Shiva knew exactly where to get them, their wives. Like, what are we most attached to, in our lives? Our partner, our wife, our husband, our family member. And then, of course, that rishis are humans too, right? So they got jealous. They got And also, they're very attached to like, we are rishis and we are following the Vedas and we do not do that, what he's up to. So they got totally offended. They said, who are you? Who are you? And the scripture says that pure naked man just said nothing. So, he's absolutely pure. He's naked. He's just letting it all hang out. And he didn't answer them. So of course they got more and more angry. So they cursed him because they're rishis. So they also have some spiritual power. Of course, the thing is with rishis is you gain all this spiritual power, but if you let yourself get angry and make a curse on someone, there it goes. It's like losing your seed in a sexual act, right? It's like all your power in that moment of digression into extreme lust or anger, just out the window. So those rishis, he just triggered them right where they needed to be triggered. They got really angry. They cursed him and they said, your lingam is going to fall off. And so off it went. And it was so intensely fiery that it started moving and burning everything. So it burned the forest. And then it went down to the underworld and it started making this fiery path through the underworld. And everybody was getting hot and totally uncomfortable and no one knew what to do. It went up to heaven. It started burning the heavens. So all the three worlds were being burned by this fiery power of Lord Shiva. And so the rishis said, oh, what have we done? They went up to Brahma and they propitiated him and said, Brahma, what's going on? They told him the story. This weird guy came. He was frolicking with our wives. And then his lingam now is burning the whole creation. What are we going to do? So Brahma meditated and he said, well, you made a mistake because that guy, he's the guy you've been worshiping all day, every day. That is Lord Shiva himself. And now you've gotten yourselves in a predicament. And so they said, please help us. We really didn't mean to. We're so sorry. We lost our senses. We didn't recognize that which we've been worshiping all day, every day when it actually came in front of us. So Brahma said, it's okay. I'll tell you how to help. So you have to propitiate Parvati, his consort, his wife, his Shakti or his supreme power in order to propitiate and calm him. So go and worship Parvati. When she becomes the yoni, and the yoni is the counterpart to the lingam, the female part that the lingam sits in, and when she becomes the yoni, only then will it propitiate Shiva, and he'll find a resting place there. And when they're unified, then balance will be restored to creation. So they went and propitiated Parvati, and they did their Vedic rituals, and they brought Ganga water, and purified the space. And she came in the form of the yoni, and the lingam came and found its place there. And so only when the two are united do we have unity, do we have that unity of opposites that creates balance in the universe. Interestingly, so creation happens in lots of different ways in the Vedas and Puranas, in the stories. Through Shiva or Purush and Prakriti, which is the Samkhya philosophies, words for the female and male principle that are non-personified. They're just the principle of male and female. Through those coming together, that's how the universe is created, according to that philosophy. As you go later into the Puranas, Shiva and Shakti, or Shiva and Parvati, take on that the personification of those two opposing sort of forces in the universe, that only through them coming together do you have a unity of opposites. And so that's also why Shiva, so whenever you see a Shivalinga, you'll see that there's also a yoni that's holding the Shivalinga. So without that, it literally falls over. There's no stability, there's no base, there's no holding. Like this universe in a form, which is also the Devi, the goddess, is the holding for that energy which pervades it. And so there's just so many ways to look at that unity. But for us too, as human beings, obviously humans also created these stories and mythologies. This is a really direct way for us to understand unity of opposites, because it's something that we experience as human beings, that coming together of opposites through male and female coming together. So it's literally a way that we can conceive of that inconceivable coming together of the two opposing principles. So Shiva also has a form called Ardhanarishwara, which is half, Ardha means half, Nari is woman, Ishwara is God. or Lord. So Ardhanarishwara is the Lord or God that is half woman and half man. And so he's depicted on his left side as being Parvati, on his right side as being Shiva. So that is a depiction that again shows that he is the God that brings together the unity of opposites. He also has a form called Hari-Hara, which Hari means Vishnu, Hara is Shiva. So in some ways, we've talked also in previous talks about how the Vaishnav cult or the worshippers of Vishnu and the Shaivite or worshippers of Shiva, those two sort of major religious groupings in India are always kind of vying for supremacy. And so there's a lot of stories about how actually Shiva is the main deity or actually Vishnu is the main deity. But this is a syncretic form. So it's a synthesis of Vishnu and Shiva. So that's another form of Shiva that you'll see, Hari-Hara. There's a story about Ardhanarishwara as well that I will share with you, and about the importance of acknowledging both halves of creation, not just the male. So long ago, there was a devotee of Shiva named Bringi, and this is a South Indian story. He went up to Mount Kailash, where Shiva and Parvati live on the top of the mountain in the Himalayas, to worship them. And everyone else who worships Shiva also knows that they have to circumambulate or do circumambulation of both of them in order to do the actual worship. You don't just circumambulate Shiva. They're together. They're always thought of as one. But Bringi was really stubborn, and he just was so focused on Shiva. He did not care about Parvati at all. So he all just wanted to circumambulate Shiva. So he was doing that. And they were like, yeah, this isn't right. It's not how it's done. Let's give you a clue about why this isn't what you're supposed to do. So Parvati sat actually on Shiva's lap so that he couldn't circumambulate just Shiva. But he got really angry, and he was still so like narrow, focused minded that he decided, well, I'm going to turn myself into a snake or a rat, depending on the story, and became really small, something he could get into a small space, and actually went in between them and just went around Shiva. So they were like, oh, this guy's really not getting the picture. So Shiva said, okay, I'm going to actually incorporate Parvati into half of my body to show that we are one. So he brought Parvati in, she became his left half. And then they were like, okay, do you get it now? Circumambulate both of us. So he turned himself into this bee or a beetle, a very tiny little boring creature, and actually bored a hole in between the two of them so that he could only circumambulate Shiva. Well, they were like, okay, yeah, he's not getting the picture. He needs to be cursed. So they cursed him. And it's said in the sort of Hindu cosmology that when a baby's born, the part of him that comes from the mother is the flesh and blood, and the part that comes from the father is the bones and the skin, the nerves. So they cursed him to lose all the parts of himself that came from his mother. So he kind of collapsed into just this skeleton with skin on it. He lost all his muscle mass and his flesh. And he was just like sitting there, and he couldn't do anything. So they felt sorry for him. So they gave him a third leg so he could sort of support himself. And so that's Bringi. He's an odd creature, but remember, worship them both. Unless you want to be turned into a worm. So that, okay, we can talk a little bit about these pictures here. So this is the Shivlinga. So you'll see this is the lingam. This is the yoni. At the bottom here, this is Parvati. And okay, so some of Shiva's attributes. Here's the damaru, the drum that's here. This is the horn. So when he was dancing that lewd dance, you can imagine him holding these two items and blowing and drumming. This is the Trishula, which is one of his weapons. It's his main weapon that's associated with him, the trident. It represents the three gunas, so sattva, raja, tama. He's associated with the tama guna, or that force of inertia that comes with destruction, where things kind of dissolve, disintegrate. But this shows that he's also the master of all of the gunas. So the sattva guna is the pure. It is associated with Vishnu. So it's the purity, sustenance sort of guna, and then the tama and raja guna is the active quality of all things in the universe. Contain all of the three gunas in them. Every food we eat has the different percentages of the different gunas. All of the materials of parts of creation, everything, all the elements contain the various gunas.
What about Nandi?
Okay, Anandi is his vahana. Vahana means a vehicle. So all the gods have different vehicles. Him riding Nandi shows his subjugation over his animal instincts. The bull is very virile and represents the sexual energy or the animal instinct. And so Nandi's also a great devotee of Shiva. So he's a very high being as well. But the fact that he takes the form of a bull symbolizes that Shiva has controlled those aspects of the self. Same with the tiger. The tiger is fierce. So in India, when you're up in the Himalayas and you see a tiger, you know that, this might be your last breath. So it represents death. The animal instincts, when you're clouded by anger or desire, that is symbolized by the tiger, but also, our own death. And so that's another symbol that he is Mrityunjaya, the defeater or conqueror of death, even though, again, he wears the attributes of death. So for him, death is just like a bracelet. It's an ornament to wear. It's not something that he fears. It's something which actually beautifies him. So same with snakes. Cobras are also symbols of death. He has the crescent moon that he wears that symbolizes time, the cycle of time that the moon represents. And so he's also the master of time. One of his other names, his epithets, is Mahakal, great time. So he conquers time, he conquers death. There's his dreadlocks. This is the Ganga falling from his jeta, from his top knot of dreadlocks that we talked about when we talked about Ganga. We talked about that story of her descent from heaven to earth. And he held her as she fell and softened her fall so that she could fall gently onto the earth, onto the Himalayas. But she also, through her pride, was like, I can fall on Shiva's head. And he was like, yeah, okay, fall on my head. And then she got lost in his dreadlocks for like eons. Just was wandering around and couldn't find her way out. Finally, she was like, help. Okay, fine. You can come out. So that's Ganga. And the fact that he holds Ganga, not only is it, from that story, but it also symbolizes when he's sitting in his yogic meditation, he is completely immersed in the bliss of his own self, which I just love that imagery. And the water symbolizes that. So that immersion in the water of the Ganga is like immersion in the bliss of one's pure being, that which is our true selves, that blissful merging. So that's the Ganga. It also represents purity. The Ganga is the great purifier. So him holding the Ganga shows that he's the great purifier or redeemer of sin, if you want to think of it as sin, or that, those wrongdoings, whatever we've done can be redeemed through his benevolence. So he also has that quality.
They're in the snow.
They're in the snow. They're on top of Kailash. He's white, which symbolizes partly that he lives there in the snow-capped mountains. Interestingly, Tamaguna, the tamas, the guna of destruction and dissolution is usually black in color. It's dark. So, but his color outside is white. Whereas Vishnu, who is sattva guna, which is associated with whiteness and purity, he's always blue. And we show him as blue, but actually, if you look at someone with really dark skin, it has like a bluish tinge to it. And so that is where that blue comes from, that he's a very just deeply dark skinned being. And yet he's associated with sattva guna. So again, it's showing that opposites are one. So white on the outside and dark in essence, and vice versa with Vishnu.
What's the symbol of this?
That is so these three marks. So if you'll see on his forehead, you also see three marks, and then his third eye there. Same thing on the linga, there's three marks, and that is the symbol of the trident, the Trishul. So anyone who's a devotee of Shiva, usually with ash, they'll put, you make your hand into this Trishula mudra and put ash on your forehead to symbolize your affinity with Shiva. So that's that mark.
Which on Ash Wednesday, which is always around Shivratri, they put ashes.
Oh, interesting.
In the Catholic
Interesting.
So yeah.
Yeah. So
the same thing, ashes to ashes.
yeah, right. And yeah, he's covered in ashes. That's also why he's white. He's covered in ashes from the cremation grounds, where he likes to hang out with his friends, the Ganas. This is beautiful Parvati. She's also called Gauri, which means fair or white. So she's light-skinned as well. But she's also called Kali, which is dark, which means black, dark-skinned. So if you read some of the stories about the three daughters of Himavat and Meena, her parents, she's the daughter of the mountains. So that's also, she's really associated with the mountains. Like her father is the Himalaya range. And so she's mountain girl. Parvati means mountain girl, mountain daughter. And so she's sometimes seen as black, sometimes seen as white.
And also Shakti.
And also Shakti, which means power, literally means power. So she's another time when Shiva dances is at the time of dissolution, when Parvati, sometimes Kali comes out of the third eye of Parvati as a personification of her rage, her righteous anger that needs to destroy something which is unhealthy for creations as its mother and caregiver. When she gets really angry, she will strike. And her third eye opens and Kali, this black, very ferocious goddess, comes out and does the work of destruction. When that's going on, sometimes Kali and Shiva are a pair. Sometimes Parvati and Shiva are a pair. It just depends which aspect of Shiva you're venerating or you're calling forth. With Parvati, he's, again, duality of opposites. He's a family man. So these are husband and wife. And there's a wonderful story, but I've already told it, so I didn't today. But one of my favorite stories is about how she woos him. And so that's, I think, probably what you're seeing here. She's worshiping Shiva as a way to, for years, she went to the Himalayas for eons and eons and eons and did what she was a high yogini in her own right. And so that's how she attracted Shiva, through her own yogic practice and powers. I mean, showing that she wasn't equal to him in spiritual practice. So that's probably what she's doing here. And this is, again, like how the linga is venerated. So on Shivratri, you'll see we'll be pouring, if you go to the ashram, we're celebrating it on Saturday. If anyone wants to check that out, Saturday night, it goes all night, and different cooling substances will be poured on the linga.
And what are the four colors?
That's something that they do here. That's not really a traditional thing. So I'm not sure actually where that comes from. Yeah.
That's part of the deal.
It's fun though. So yeah, I think we're out of time. And that is just a little bit about the vastness of Lord Shiva.
Every day before the sunrise, birds waken me. Golden clouds reflect upon the ever-changing scenery. How did we get so lost on it? How did we get so blessed? How did we get so lost on it? How did we get so blessed? Every day I gaze upon the mountain's majestic face. Every time it's so sublime to come home, sacred place. How did we get so blessed? Oh yes. How did we get so blessed? How did we get so blessed? Oh yes. How did we get so blessed? And then it falls down, our hearts are broken, and no light can be seen. But even there, in our dark despair, blessings waiting. Blessing is waiting. Every day I pray to find some light within. Every time I know
I can begin again. How did we get so blessed? I am. How did we get so blessed? How did we get so blessed? Oh yes, how did we get so blessed? We were born blessed. Our blessing is waiting, waiting. How did we get so blessed? Hooray, hooray, we got blessed! We got blessed! Seriously, just being here. Holy cow. Lucky us. Huh? And now we're going to sing our love song. She's going to bring the camera over so you can see the words to it. Thanks for being here. Sandy is going to talk about something next week. Sandra Richardson. She's right up there. She's doing the talk next week. Can you get a little closer, maybe?
Well, if you put it up as the main view, should be okay.
Oh, main view. Let's try that. Come on, baby. Let's do it. There. Now there is love on earth, and it has begun with me. Now there is love on earth, the love that was meant to be. With all our relations, loved ones, all are we. Now I walk with my family in perfect harmony. Love has begun with me, and this is the moment now. With every breath I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in love eternally. Now there is love on earth, and it has begun with me. We are the light, the love, and the presence. Wherever we are, love is, and all is well. There's snacks upstairs. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Shivratri. We will meet again next Sunday. Thanks for being here. Hooray, hooray. There we go. There's the end.